Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining this afternoon, whether in person or over Zoom. We are so excited to have the History Project and the JP Historical Society back here to celebrate the 20th anniversary of marriage equality in Massachusetts. And Theo Linger, he, they pronouns, will be speaking with us today. He's a public historian with nearly a decade of experience in the field. He holds a master's degree in history from Simmons University, and he previously worked as a park ranger for the National Parks of Boston. Theo gave an excellent presentation here on the history of Pride in Boston back in June for Pride Month, and we're so glad he was able to come back for LGBTQ History Month. Everyone, please welcome Theo Linger with the History Project.
All right. Thank you for having me here today. We're going to be delving into the history of the fight for marriage equality while celebrating the last 20 years of same-sex marriage here in Massachusetts. I am Theo Linger, as Nick so helpfully said, so I don't need to belabor that point of who I am. Instead, I can get right ahead to the History Project is a community-based independent archive focused exclusively on documenting and preserving the history of Boston's and New England's LGBTQ plus communities and sharing that history with LGBTQ plus individuals, organizations, allies, and the public. We maintain one of the largest independent LGBTQ plus archives in the nation, which includes over 250 separate collections encompassing more than 1 million documents. These collections range from the records of early gay liberation organizations to photographs of pre-Stonewall Boston, to objects such as t-shirts and buttons, and also relevant to today's presentation, materials documenting the marriage equality movement. We are also currently crowdsourcing marriage stories and get back to that right at the end of the presentation. So our agenda for today. While same-sex marriage has been legal in Massachusetts since 2004, the Goodrich versus Department of Public Health case was preceded by many years of unrecognized same-sex unions, legal challenges, and protests. We're starting with morality laws and Boston marriages, exploring gay love during the gay liberation era of the 1970s, setbacks and legal battles through the 1990s, the Goodrich decision itself, which we're celebrating the 20th anniversary of this year, plus national battles for marriage equality, and we'll end with the state of marriage today. The image that we have here on the right-hand side of the slide is a 1985 cover from the Boston-based publication Gay Community News, where they explored the topic of lesbians in marriage. So that is a clue of things to come. So for the topic of Boston marriages, that might be a topic some of you have heard before. If not, here we go. So Massachusetts has had laws prohibiting same-sex relationships since the 1600s. It was one of the first things the English colonizers did upon reaching what is today Massachusetts. Some of these colonial era statutes prohibited quote unquote sodomy and buggery, while others were targeting quote unquote lewd and lascivious behavior. Interestingly, lewd and lascivious behavior is not very clearly defined and is used to maintain community moral standards. Over time, those arrested for lewd and lascivious behavior included sex workers, loiterers, and intoxicated people, in addition to those arrested for engaging in same-sex acts. So as you might imagine, these kind of policies, very loosely defined, could be used to crack down on anyone acting out in society, and often was used to harass various marginalized groups in addition to queer people. Between 1836 and 1875, skipping right ahead a little bit, the opening of some 50 women's colleges gave women new and unprecedented access to education and independence. Some chose not to marry men, instead forming lifelong partnerships known at the time as Boston marriages. This was a term that was popularized by the author Henry James in his novel The Bostonians, which came out in 1886. He was inspired by his sister Alice and her relationship with Catherine Loring. Some of the most well-known Boston marriages of this late 19th century era include Sarah Orne Jewett, the author and poet, and her partner Annie Adams Fields, the writer and philanthropist. They are featured in the image on the left-hand side of the screen. They became partners after Annie's husband died in 1881. And they remained companions through 1909 when Sarah passed away. Their relationship is documented through their correspondence and Annie's memoir, though it was edited for publication. The original version is in the collections of the Massachusetts Historical Society, if you ever want to take a look through that. Another well-known relationship featured in the little cartoon locket was between Catherine Lee Bates, who, if that's a familiar name, she wrote the song America the Beautiful, and Catherine Coleman, who was a historian. Both women taught at Wellesley College just outside of Boston and were in a relationship together for 25 years. And so, yeah, this was a very popular arrangement, particularly among middle to upper class women who had the financial independence to not have to get with some man. Skipping on ahead, we have the interesting case of Ethel Kimball. So all of these images on the screen now are newspaper articles about Ethel Kimball. While same-sex marriage was not legal until 2004 in Massachusetts, Ethel Kimball married at least 2 women. What a go-getter. Ethel, born in 1882, was well known in New England for theft and forgery, among other crimes. If you've ever heard the phrase "be gay, do crimes," she was embodying that before any of us were born. Ethel was known for quote unquote masquerading or passing as a man by dressing masculinely and using masculine names. In 1921, for example, Ethel was arrested for stealing an automobile, and police soon found out that John Hathaway was actually Ethel Kimball. John was a wealthy widower who had graduated from MIT, and John was also married to Louise Echtler of Somerville. Throughout the 1920s, Ethel's escapades were documented in multiple newspaper articles. After a while, it was just a matter of, oh, she's at it again. She married, so these headlines include, "She married her for a lark, masquerader jailed while bride hides." September 10th, 1928, from the Evening Republican. Boston girls posed as man and wife. Ethel Kimball, husband, had pipe and chewing tobacco. August 11th, 1926, Boston Daily Globe. Wife denies she knew husband was woman. December 29th, 1921, Alexandria Gazette. Ethel Kimball again in toils. Boston woman marries Pearl Davis of Maine. Bride's nephew detects the masquerade, couple held by police in Hartford, Connecticut. So she's just bouncing from state to state, marrying different women, stealing cars, being a nuisance. I say good for her. Unfortunately, Ethel is lost to history about 1930 when they moved to New York City. We have no idea what became of this individual. When Ethel eventually passed away, how she ended her days, nothing. We have no idea what happened. Heading into more modern times, in 1971, Boston's gay community held its first Pride March. which was a politically charged event addressing issues like misogyny, police brutality, and anti-sodomy laws. Protesters at St. Paul's Cathedral demanded the inclusion of LGBTQ plus people and women in ordination and the right to same-sex marriage. So having that discussion all the way back in 1971. Despite there being no legal standing, there are many examples of LGBTQ plus people marrying their partners, and not just in Massachusetts. So Jack Baker and Michael McConnell from Minneapolis, Minnesota, claimed to hold the very first same-sex marriage license that was not revoked. In 1971, after being denied a marriage license, they sued County Clerk Gerard Nelson. Although their case was appealed to the US Supreme Court, the court declined to hear it. Baker and McConnell eventually obtained a marriage license after Michael adopted Jack, and Jack changed his name to Pat Lynn McConnell, a kind of gender neutral name to kind of slide past the authorities there. And their marriage was officially recognized as legal in 2018, and they are still together to this day. Back in Boston on April 7th, 1973, the Reverend William Alberts married Bob Jones and Harry Freeman at the Old West Church, leading to his expulsion from the Methodist Church. And the photos of the people on the right in the white tuxedos are from a wedding reception held at Fran's Place, a lesbian bar that was in Lynn, Massachusetts. Regardless of the legality of marriage, same-sex couples sometimes held their own ceremonies. So lots of examples of the ways people were getting around the law or doing what they wanted to do, regardless of whether they had legal recognition or not. But having legal recognition was absolutely crucial. So we get into the 1980s. Although kiss-ins were a form of protest that became popular in the 1980s and 90s, on the left is a gay community news article about a kiss-in held at Faneuil Hall. You can still see those same exact doors in downtown Boston today. We also started to see public same-sex marriages used as a form of protest. So getting dressed up in your nice clothes, heading out to a public place, holding a little ceremony. You have a sample of vows that could be used for this. Queer Nation, a protest group that was influenced by ACT UP, that is the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, held very in-your-face protests. In the early 1990s, Queer Nation gathered in front of Holy Cross Cathedral to protest the Catholic Church's opposition, to the family protection, which would have allowed cohabitating, that should not be that hard of a word, goodness, same-sex couples to register as domestic partners and receive health insurance benefits and hospital visitation and bereavement rights, which was especially crucial during the AIDS crisis when so many, mostly men, often other members of the queer community, were not allowed to see their partners in the hospital or inherit when they passed away. So that was a major sticking point in the 80s, 90s era of the marriage discussion. So in this particular protest at Holy Cross, about 24 couples exchanged vows. The queer wedding vows on the right also include options for polyamorous relationships. So they were really keeping an open mind and thinking ahead. All right, we get progress and we have setbacks. There are 3 major legal battles in the 1990s that set the stage. Sorry, there's some sort of sirens outside. There are 3 major legal battles in the 1990s that set the stage for the fight for marriage equality in Massachusetts. So starting in 1990 in Hawaii, on December 17th, 1990, 3 same-sex couples applied to the Hawaii Department of Public Health for a marriage license. Ultimately, they were denied and began a legal battle that brought same-sex marriage debates to the national stage. In May of 1993, a few years later, since the courts moved very slowly, we will see plenty of in this presentation. This Hawaii Supreme Court ruled that the fundamental right to marriage could extend to same-sex couples. While the case moved through the courts, Hawaii passed an amendment to its state constitution, though, forbidding same-sex marriage. We then have the Defense of Marriage Act, as some folks may remember. Despite President Bill Clinton's 1992 campaign promises to support LGBTQ+ rights, he signed Don't Ask, Don't Tell into law in 1993, allowing LGBTQ+ people to serve in the military only if they remained closeted. Facing re-election pressures, Clinton also signed the Defense of Marriage Act, DOMA, in 1996, which denied federal benefits and recognition to same-sex couples. In 2013, Clinton criticized DOMA as incompatible with our Constitution and called on the Supreme Court to overturn it. And in 1997, Baker versus Vermont. So in July of 1997, 3 same-sex couples, tell me if you've heard this one before, filed suit claiming that the Vermont state constitution entitled them to marriage. In December of 1999, the Vermont Supreme Court unanimously ruled that the state must guarantee the same protections and benefits to same-sex couples as it does to straight spouses. It was then up to the Vermont legislature to legalize gay marriage or a domestic partnership law. Vermont's landmark civil union law defined a civil union as a legal status parallel to civil marriage for all purposes under Vermont state law. On the right is a photo of a historic marker for Baker versus Vermont. So that is probably a little tiny to read the entirety of, but it just summarizes what I just said. So back to Massachusetts once again. In 2001, this time it's 7 Massachusetts same-sex couples, rather than the trend of 3 that we were seeing previously, applied for marriage licenses and were all denied. On April 11th, 2001, GLAAD, the Gay and Lesbian Advocates and Defenders, filed Goodridge versus Department of Public Health, arguing that denying same-sex couples equal marriage rights was unconstitutional, at least per the Massachusetts state constitution. The Suffolk Superior Court ruled against the plaintiffs in May of 2002, a decision that GLAAD appealed to the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court. On November 18th, 2003, so you can see we're just progressing further and further in time, this takes forever. The Supreme Judicial Court ruled 4-3 that the state's ban on same-sex marriage was unconstitutional. The ruling, written by Chief Justice Margaret Marshall, states in part, the Massachusetts Constitution affirms the dignity and equality of all individuals. It forbids the creation of second-class citizens. In reaching our conclusion, we have given full deference to the arguments made by the Commonwealth, but it has failed to identify any constitutionally adequate reason for denying civil marriage to same-sex couples. Hooray! The state began issuing marriage licenses to same-sex couples on May 17th, 2004. The photos on this slide include 2 of the plaintiff couples from the court case, Hillary and Julie Goodridge of, Goodridge versus Department of Public Health in their smart white suits up top, and Rob Compton and David Wilson. I believe that's the Arlington Street Church on the bottom. Slide 11, the repercussions, because we can't have nice things. Cambridge City Hall opened at 12:01 a.m. on May 17th, 2004, 20 years ago this year, to issue marriage licenses. And the first couple to apply for a license were Marcia Hams and Susan Shepard. They are considered to have the first legally recognized same-sex marriage in the United States. That's the couple on the bottom right with the glasses, free to marry. Across the state, more than 1,000 couples applied for marriages on the first day. The Goodridge ruling caused shockwaves across the country, with some cities allowing same-sex couples to marry, while others worked to pass legislation banning same-sex marriage altogether. I also know around this time, there was a big gathering of different religious groups in Faneuil Hall trying to combat this decision, trying to propose countermeasures, but it ended up not working. There was an attempt again in 2007 to amend the Massachusetts Constitution to forbid same-sex marriage, just retract the whole thing, but it was defeated in the Massachusetts legislature. And from what we can tell, they didn't try again. And then nationally, two Supreme Court cases ultimately overturned the Federal Defense of Marriage Act. The first, United States versus Windsor, determined that Section 3 of the Defense of Marriage Act, which federally defined marriage as a union between one man and one woman, was unconstitutional because it defied the Fifth Amendment, where due process guarantees the right to equal protection under the law. Married same-sex couples were not recognized as couples under federal law, even if they were married, which stood in opposition to that equal protection clause. Edie Windsor and her partner Thea Spire, depicted in the top left, met in 1963 and began dating in 1965. Thea proposed to Edie with a diamond brooch, very sweet, in 1967. The couple married in Toronto, Ontario, Canada in 2007. Thea left Edie the entirety of her estate upon her death in 2009, but because their relationship was not federally recognized, Edie was required to pay over $300,000 in federal estate taxes. The case made its way to the Supreme Court, and on June 26, 2013, in a 5-4 decision, the court found Section 3 of DOMA to be unconstitutional. So that knocks out that part of the law, but not the whole thing. And you can see on the bottom left, Edie Windsor with the hat on and the sash in a pride celebration later in her life. In 2015, Obergefell versus Hodges held that the 14th Amendment requires states to license and recognize same-sex marriage. James Obergefell and his partner John Arthur James lived in Ohio. The two started dating in the early 1990s, and in 2012, John was diagnosed with ALS, or otherwise known as Lou Gehrig's disease. The disease progressed rapidly, and by April 2013, he required in-home hospice care. The couple could not be married in Ohio, and a marriage from outside Ohio would not have been recognized within their home state. When the Supreme Court struck down the Defense of Marriage Act, in part in United States versus Windsor, the couple decided to go for it, because the federal government would recognize their union even if the state would not. Because of John's decline, the couple chartered a plane to Maryland in July of 2013. You can see that picture of the plane on the right. A state where only Jim had to appear to get their marriage license. You didn't have to have both parties in the building. The couple was married in the plane on the tarmac since John's health was too fragile for him to even get off the plane at that time. Jim and John filed a complaint in U.S. court alleging discrimination in Ohio's marriage laws. Ohio did not recognize their marriage, and when John died, his death certificate would say that he was unmarried, and thus would not list Jim as his surviving spouse. John did end up dying in October of 2013, and the case made its way to the U.S. Supreme Court. In June of 2015, the court held that the 14th Amendment requires states to license and recognize same-sex marriage. So on slide 12 here, we have this past spring, we celebrated 20 years of the first same-sex weddings in Massachusetts. The anniversary to all of those first individuals. A scare tactic and argument often heard throughout this period was that legalizing same-sex marriage would negatively affect different-sex marriage. A report published by RAND, a research organization, shows that there have been no negative effects on marriage, divorce, or cohabitation among different-sex couples. Researchers reviewed nearly 100 studies analyzing the consequences of same-sex marriage on family formation and well-being. Ultimately, legal recognition has been positive and it has, surprising very few, it has not affected different sex couples in the slightest. The Census Bureau estimates that there are currently about 710,000 married same-sex couples in the United States. And as we continue on into the 2020s, we do find that this is not a story that is settled, unfortunately. With the decision that overturned Roe versus Wade, Clarence Thomas, in his opinion, did say that decisions like Obergefell, like Loving, like all of these different cases that brought about social change in the last century or so were not settled law, and that anything predicated on the 14th Amendment, as Obergefell was, could potentially be overturned. So that is something that we are contending with and figuring out what to do about to this day. But as for what the History Project is up to, the History Project wants to collect your marriage stories. We have all these fun images of people getting married over the years and in 2004 itself. If you want and you have a story to share, you can visit historyproject.org/marriage. For more information, you can attend one of our oral history and scanning pop-ups. We're going to be having those at several different Boston Public Library branches over the next few months. So you can stop by and sit down with one of our volunteers and record your story. And we can get that documented, get that into our archive, make you a part of this history. So thank you so much for coming. Thank you to the Boston Public Library and the JP Historical Society for having us this afternoon. And I encourage you, if you haven't already, to follow our social media, check out our website, email us for more information if you need. We are always happy to hold these types of events, welcome new volunteers. We have a lot of fun. And we like being able to share this history for future generations and keep this all safe. So thank you again and have a good rest of your day. Did we have any questions in the chat or in the in-person? Sure, what do you have? Okay, if you were online and not necessarily able to hear that, our JP Historical Society co-host asked about our visiting the archives. I believe currently it is by appointment only. We're working toward having a more public storefront, if you will, for what we do. The best way to get information about visiting is the email address on the screen, and someone would be happy to get you into the archives, let you look around. We also have a lot of digitized collections on historyproject.org, a lot of things to scroll through. One of my favorite things on the website is somebody took a camcorder and filmed the entirety of the 1988 Boston Pride Parade. And that's something my partner and I like to sit down and watch every June. So that is kind of that. Anything else you're curious about? All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Theo, for that wonderful presentation, and thank you all for joining us here, both in person and virtually. And please help yourself to the refreshments, and we also have books and pins and stickers over there on the table you can help yourself to as well. Have a good weekend, everyone.